welcome to the Oedipal Circus, ladies and gentlemen. So here we are, folks, another day, another neurosis. You know what Freud said, the interpretation of dreams is the royal road to the unconscious. Well, congratulations, you've been sleepwalking down that royal road for decades, and guess who's been directing traffic? That's right, mother. Now before you get your repressed knickers in a twist, let me explain something Sigmund figured out while you were busy pretending everything was fine. Your mother isn't living in your house anymore, but she's got permanent residency in your superego. She's like that annoying houseguest who never leaves, except this houseguest has been redecorating your psyche since you were knee-high to a defense mechanism. The unconscious, your mother's real estate empire. Freud once observed, the unconscious is the true psychical reality. And what's the premier property in that reality? The mother imago, that's fancy psychology talk for the version of mom that's been running your emotional software since the Paleolithic era of your childhood. You see, your actual mother, that flesh and blood woman who burned your toast and forgot your birthday, she's not the problem. The problem is the psychological motherboard she installed in your cranium before you even knew what a cranium was. It's like having malware, except the malware thinks it's protecting you. Where ID was, their ego shall be, Freud declared. Translation, where your primal I want mommy was, there your adult I can handle this myself should be. But most of you are still running on the factory settings from 1987. The Oedipal Comedy Hour. Let's talk about the Oedipus complex, Freud's greatest hit, bigger than Satisfaction by the Rolling Stones, and just as hard to get out of your head. Every little boy wants to marry mommy and eliminate daddy. Every little girl has her own complicated dance with the parental units. But here's the cosmic joke, you think you grew out of it, but you just learned to dress it up in business casual. You're 45 years old, sitting in therapy, complaining about your relationships, and your therapist is thinking, this person is still trying to resolve whether mommy loved them enough. It's like watching someone play chess while everyone else moved on to quantum physics. The ego is not master in its own house, Freud reminded us. And who's been the landlord all these years? The maternal superego, that internal voice that sounds suspiciously like someone who used to cut the crusts off your sandwiches. The repetition compulsion, your greatest hits album. Here's where it gets beautifully tragic. Freud discovered the repetition compulsion, the unconscious tendency to recreate familiar patterns, even when they hurt like hell. You know what that means? You're a human jukebox, playing the same 3 songs from your childhood trauma collection. Song number 1, Please Love Me, The Way I Needed You To. Song number 2, I'll Never Be Good Enough, remix. Song number 3, Abandonment Blues, extended dance version. What we cannot remember, we are condemned to repeat, said the good doctor. You can't remember being 3 years old and desperate for validation, so you spend your adult life creating situations where you're desperate for validation. It's like Groundhog Day, except Bill Murray never figures it out. The transference tango. Every relationship you have is secretly a mother audition. Your boss, your spouse, your barista, they're all being asked to play a role they never signed up for. Freud called this transference, and it's basically emotional karaoke where everyone's singing the wrong song. You walk into a relationship thinking, finally, someone who'll understand me without me having to explain anything. Meanwhile, your partner is thinking, why does this person need so much reassurance about things that happened before we met? The great question that has never been answered is, what does a woman want? Freud wondered. Well, Sigmund, here's what everyone wants. They want their partner to retroactively fix their childhood. Spoiler alert, it doesn't work that way. The defense mechanism buffet. Your psyche has been running a 24-hour defense mechanism buffet since you were old enough to realize mommy wasn't perfect. Denial, my childhood was fine. While your eye twitches involuntarily. Projection, everyone else has mother issues. Pointing frantically at literally everyone. Sublimation, turning your need for maternal approval into workaholism. Reaction formation, I'm totally independent. While speed dialing your therapist. The mind is like an iceberg, it floats with 1/7 of its bulk above water, Freud noted. The other 6/7? That's where your mother complex is hosting its eternal pool party. The talking cure for the eternally mute. Freud invented psychoanalysis, the talking cure, because he realized people were walking around with emotional lockjaw. You've been taught to say "I'm fine" so often, you believe it's actually a complete sentence. But here's the thing about the unconscious, it's like a basement full of Christmas decorations from 1973. Eventually, you have to go down there and sort through the mess. Being entirely honest with oneself is a good exercise, Freud suggested. Imagine that, being honest about the fact that part of you is still waiting for mommy to notice you drew her a picture. The death drive in your relationship patterns. Freud's later work introduced thanatos, the death drive, the unconscious desire to return to an inorganic state. In practical terms, this means you're unconsciously sabotaging anything that might actually make you happy because happiness feels foreign to your childhood programming. You meet someone who treats you well, and immediately your internal alarm system goes off. Warning, this person is not recreating your familiar trauma patterns. Abort mission. It's like your psyche is a bouncer at the nightclub of your life, and it only lets in people who remind you of home even when home was a psychological disaster zone. The return of the repressed, or why your childhood won't stay dead. The return of the repressed, Freud's way of saying that whatever you shove down in the basement of your mind will eventually come upstairs and rearrange your furniture. You spent decades perfecting the art of not thinking about your relationship with your mother, and now you're confused why you can't take compliments without suspicion. Feel guilty when things go well. Choose partners who need fixing. Apologize for existing. Congratulations. Your repressed material has been promoted to CEO of your adult relationships. The superego, your internal helicopter parent. The superego, that's Freud's term for your internal parent figure, has been running your show longer than you care to admit. It's like having a helicopter parent who never moved out of your head. The superego is the representative of all moral restrictions, Freud explained. And who is your first moral authority? Right, the woman who taught you that good boys and girls don't cry, don't get angry, and definitely don't have needs that inconvenience other people. Your superego is basically your mother's voice with a psychology degree and a grudge. Sublimation, or how you turn trauma into achievement. Here's where Freud gets interesting. Sublimation, redirecting your primal urges into socially acceptable activities. You couldn't get the love you needed, so you became the overachiever. Maybe then they'll notice. The people pleaser, approval is love, right? The caretaker, if I take care of everyone, someone will take care of me. The perfectionist, maybe flawless performance equals love. Civilization began the first time an angry person cast a word instead of a rock, Freud might have said if he was feeling poetic. Your civilization began when you learned to perform instead of feel. The pleasure principle versus reality principle, your daily soap opera. Every day, you're living out the eternal struggle between what Freud called the pleasure principle, what you want, and the reality principle, what's actually possible. Your pleasure principle is still that kid who wanted unconditional love and constant validation. Your reality principle is the adult who's figured out that the world doesn't work that way. But here's the kicker. Most people never actually grow up, they just get better at pretending their inner child isn't running the show. The uncanny, when your past shows up uninvited. Freud wrote about das Unheimliche, the uncanny, that eerie feeling when something familiar becomes strange. You know what's uncanny? Realizing you're dating your mother. Or your father. Or some hybrid creature that represents everything you swore you'd never become. The uncanny is that class of the frightening which leads back to what is known of old and long familiar, Freud observed. In other words, your dating history is basically your childhood trauma wearing different outfits. Breaking the repetition, the real work begins. So what's the solution? Freud had some ideas. Where ID was, there ego shall be. Translation, where your unconscious childhood programming was, there your conscious adult choice should be. But here's what nobody tells you, this process feels like psychological surgery without anesthesia. You're essentially performing an exorcism on yourself, except the ghost you're casting out has been your roommate for decades. The voice of the intellect is a soft one, but it does not rest until it has gained a hearing, Freud promised. That soft voice has been trying to get your attention for years, but you've been too busy reenacting your childhood drama to listen. The final analysis. Here's the brutal truth Freud figured out while you were busy being normal. Most people spend their entire lives trying to get their needs met by people who can't meet them, because they're unconsciously trying to get their childhood needs met by their adult relationships. It's like trying to use a 2024 iPhone with 1987 software. The hardware has evolved, but the operating system is still running Please Love Me version 1.0. The goal of all life is death, Freud noted darkly. But maybe the goal of all psychology is life, actual life, not the zombie existence most people call adulthood. The real revolution isn't learning to hate your mother or worship her. The real revolution is becoming conscious of the ways she lives in your psyche, and then choosing, for the first time in your life, how much real estate she gets to occupy. The Freudian finale. Analysis does not set out to make pathological reactions impossible, but to give the patient's ego freedom to decide one way or another, Freud concluded. Freedom to decide. Imagine that. Not the freedom to blame, not the freedom to repeat, but the freedom to choose your response instead of letting your unconscious choose for you. And maybe, just maybe, when you stop trying to get your mother's approval whether she's alive, dead, or just emotionally unavailable in the suburbs, you might discover something revolutionary. You don't need anyone's permission to exist. That, my friends, is what Freud would have called a successful analysis. And what George Carlin would have called finally pulling your head out of your ass. The choice, as they say, is yours. Your unconscious has been making decisions for you long enough. Time to fire the old management and hire someone competent, yourself. The only person with whom you have to compare yourself is you in the past. Sigmund Freud, probably while wondering why his patients kept talking about their mothers,